Hello everyone, welcome to the stream today. We're going to keep working on Conduit, the real-world sample project that I'm writing in ASP.NET plus Couchbase implementation for. For one thing, I'm going to use JetBrains Writer today. I've been using Visual Studio up until today. I'm going to use JetBrains Writer. Let's go over to the GitHub project where I'm keeping track of all these Conduit tasks. And this is where we are. So we're in progress with auth, login, and registration. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, so that's why I've kind of grouped them together, but they're both in progress right now. What I'm hoping to accomplish today is to actually write some tests for these endpoints. I haven't done any testing on those, so testing of the endpoints maybe, testing of the actual mediator classes definitely, and then once I have those tests in place, I might need to start exploring validation. You know, what happens if they send me a null or a blank or something invalid? This is important for a number of reasons. One is just make sure it works right, catch any weird exceptions or anything. And number two, when I eventually take this full implementation and make it an official Couchbase example, which is definitely in the plan to do, one of the problems with creating tutorials like this is that code can get out of date. Libraries can get out of date. They need upgrading or patching, or they have security issues, things like that. And this code, let's say we upgrade to Couchbase 7.5 or Couchbase 8 or Couchbase whatever in the future. Will this code still work? And so those tests will be in place to help with that. And I thought it might be interesting to get, in this case, ChatGPT to maybe write a unit test for me and see how good that unit test would be. So why don't we go ahead and start there. So I'm going to add a project, and this is going to be a unit test project. Let's call it that. And we'll call it conduit.test. I'm definitely going to use NUnit because that's my jam. I like NUnit, NUnit for life, that sort of thing. I've been using NUnit for a long, long time. I'm going to stick with NUnit. So let's go ahead and create that and see what it builds. So there we go. Got a test project. It's got, let's see, NUnit analyzers, NUnit 3 test adapter. These are all the things I normally have to add. Microsoft Test SDK, of course. I don't know what coverlet collector is. That might be a code coverage library. Here's a standard NUnit test structure. So let's go to login request handler. So I've got this handle method here that takes a login request. It's going to touch the database to see if the user exists, to see if the password matches, and then if it does, it's going to generate a token and return a viewModel object as part of the login result. So we're going to take this method right here. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, write a unit test for this method, and I'll paste the method in there. I'm not going to specify anything else. I don't want to say anything about mocking or anything like that. I want to see what it actually generates. So, all right, firstly, we need to mock the dependency. So it is using mocking right away. Mock the dependencies of the class containing this method, which appear to be bucket provider and auth service. So if we go back to here, that's correct. These are the two dependencies that probably need to be mocked if I want to make this a unit test in isolation. Could also use some sort of fake, but it looks like it's going with the mock here. It doesn't say what framework it's using for mocks yet. I'm going to assume it's using mock, M-O-Q. Let's find out. So it's creating a login request. That's part of the arrange. Yep. Creating a user, which is probably the user that's going to be in the database, right? Because now it's mocking out the bucket provider to return a bucket, and the bucket to return a collection, and the collection to return a exists result, that's pretty clever that it found that in here. Also returns a actual result from the database. Okay, so then it gets the result, passing in request. So where did it create login handler? Underscore login handlers? Yeah, here it is. Pretty great that it found that. I didn't remember giving it the constructor. I just gave it the method, but it kind of inferred the constructor, that's pretty impressive actually. Okay, so then a lot of mocking going on here. There's the result. A lot of assertions as well, but might be okay. So this test seems pretty good. This seems very close to something that I would write. So I'm going to take this and bring it over here, paste this test wholesale. Let's talk about structure here with this test. So this needs to be changed to the class name that I'm testing is login request handler. Login request handler tests. Okay, so I've got the class name login request handler test, and this is the normal way I name tests because I'm testing this class here and I'm calling it tests just so it doesn't conflict with the name. I do plan to create integration tests in here. So I'm going to create a folder called units That's where I'm going to put unit tests. And I'm going to create another folder in that called, well, and this is where I need to think about structure some more. I normally want to mirror the structure of my web project in my unit test project, or in this case, unit test folder. So if I'm going to mirror, it's going to be under units/requests/auth, and then in auth I will have test for login request handler, registration request handler, and anything else I might need. Suggest a folder structure for a .NET project that contains mediator requests, mediator results, mediator handlers, as well as service classes. Keep in mind that I want to group them by functionality. So let's see what it comes up with. Given that you want to group the classes by functionality, you can organize the folders as follows. So I've got root, source, project name, auth, commands, handlers. Okay, this is interesting. Well, here's the thing, is that this is kind of grouping those things at the root. But I do like this, where it's got auth, and then under auth I've got commands, which can contain handlers, requests, and results, and then I've got services. So it's separate from commands, but it's still related to auth. And then queries, I don't know if I'm going to actually use, this assumes a CQRS type of situation. And then there's tags, etc. So I like that structure. But then I need to come up with a sort of a root folder name. So this puts them all under the project. I don't want to do that because I've also got controllers and models, and I've got this user model. So models I do want to keep separate. Those are more data related. But these view models, for instance, these are all auth related as well. So there, now if I look at my project, my web project, anything related to auth is right there in this auth folder. So there's the commands, there's the controllers, services, and view models. So I kind of like this structure. So this seems to be working just fine. So this structure, I think is going to work for me. Hopefully we won't get in a situation where it gets messier than this. We probably will. We'll have to deal with it that time. So under unit, create a folder called auth. And then under auth, I'll create a folder called handlers. I'm going to move login request handler tests into handlers. And I'll adjust the namespace there. It's just the one. So there we go. So I got these tests. A lot of red here, you can see, because I need to add some references. So the first thing I need to reference is this login handler, right? So that means I need to add a dependency between the tests and what I'm actually testing, which is conduit.web. Wait, is it called login handler? No, it's not called login handler. That's why. Because again, it kind of inferred the name of the class. There we go. Okay. So it added all of them for me, not just login handler, but all the Couchbase ones as well. And so now you're saying, well, what about all this mock? My mocking framework of choice is an old one. Mock, install package. I already installed the package. There we go. So I've got mock. A mock is a way to kind of take an interface in a unit test. One thing you want unit tests to do is you want them to test one individual piece of functionality. You want to just test something under isolation. So in my case, I want to test, look at this handler, I want to test just this code in here. However, this code touches a database and touches an auth service. I don't want to test those. I'll test them on their own. Well, I probably won't test the database on its own, but I'll test this one on its own. So I want to just run a test as if, let's assume the database works fine. I'm going to mock that part out and say, instead of hitting the database, just do like a kind of a fake version of the database so that I can continue with the test and just test this logic in this class. So that's what a mock framework does. It's one way you can remove those dependencies from a test. There's a mock, there's a fake. So I could create a fake implementation of this interface. So I'm basically creating a mock myself, but I create my own fake class to do that. Or there's something called a stub. Fake is a simplified version of an object that mimics the behavior, but it's not something you put in production. Yep, that makes sense. A stub is, okay, so a stub is something that you program it to respond in certain ways. So I'm saying, here's what I want the stub to return. In my mind, there's a lot of overlap between these sort of things. You know, this mocking framework actually may be able to make fakes and stubs as we go forward, but it's just a tool to write unit tests so that one, they can be faster, and two, they can be isolated. So here's a bunch of mock stuff, and this is a little bit unwieldy, but there's a lot going on. Mocking out Couchbase and things is a multiple step process. So I may want to move some of these into a base class, and we'll get to that when we get this one working. So let's see how it goes. I don't think it's going to work, but we'll see how it goes. I'll create a directory called fakes, and I'm going to create a directory of that called Couchbase. I have done this before. So I'm going to create a class called fake exists result. and this is going to implement, I think it's iGetResult. So this is actually a interface used by the Couchbase SDK. So this is not something I created. It's an interface that Couchbase SDK uses. If I want to return a exist result, I can't new that up. I can't instantiate that myself. It's an internal class. It's used only for Couchbase. However, the interface itself I can implement. So you can see there's only two methods here, cas and exists. I don't care about the cas for this particular use case. So I'm going to just have this throw in a new not implemented exception. And for exists, I'm just going to put in a constructor here, and we'll make this a private set. Exists equals exists. Okay. So what this means is I can create a fake result that can return whatever value I want it to return for the purposes of testing. So this will be a new fake exist result, and I'm going to create an instructor for that where exists is true. And so this might be something I have to refactor up to the arrange, but again, just for now, this is working. And why does this work? Because exists async returns, if I have zoom it going, yeah, returns I exists result. It doesn't actually return the concrete class, it returns the interface. And so this also implements the interface, which means I can inject my own fake into the test. Okay, I'll do the same thing for get result. And again, for most of these, I don't really care, so I'm going to leave them as not implemented exception. But the main thing I'm concerned about is the content as. So let's put a constructor in here. Content. I get result of t. Is that going to work? So this might be an issue. So this one I might have to get a little hacky. Content equals content. Just call it object, for instance. Hacky, but this is a fake. It doesn't really matter that much. So then I can return t of content. Okay, so then this is all the arranging I think I need. So I need to change this, of course. What is in login submit model? So it's just email and password. Login view model, email and password. So login submit model equals new login submit model. Okay. I'll put that right here. And then login submit model user equals new view model. And I'm going to, let's move this user up here. This is actually the user in the database. Just name that to be clear here. Try to be clear anyway. And so then for this, I want to give it a, let's see, what do we got? Email and password. So email equals user in database dot email, because in this case I do want these to match. Password equals user in database dot password. That's all I need. Let's see if we can't initialize this. Yeah, okay. So that's fine. Here's the act. So I'm just going to hit that handle method. Now normally Mediator would handle that for me. That would be called from an ASP.NET controller or whatever, but we're going to go directly to it. And you can see login handler was instantiated up here in setup. Okay, and then this returns a result, and we just need to test to make sure it's what I expect. So now I can test this, and this is one of the cool things about Writer and about ReSharper is it gives me this nice little test button right here in the IDE. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Okay, expression tree may not contain a call invocation, uses optional arguments. So exists async. Oh, missing some arguments. So yeah, this is an annoying thing about how mock works. Maybe it's an annoying thing about how .NET works is I can't just leave optional arguments blank. So I normally wouldn't use options in exists async, but I have to pass something in there. So that's another compiler error. Let's try running now, see what happens. Okay, there we go. Yes, this is pretty much what I expected. I'm trying to provide a mock for a concrete class, and mock can't handle that. Now there are some mocking frameworks that can do this. MOQ cannot do that. What do I do about this? Well, give it an interface. IAuth service. I didn't need that until now, and adding an interface just for testing may not always be the right thing to do. So there's my interface, and I'll create in its own file. And since I did that, I also have to go back to program here, add transient, IAuth service, implement auth service. There we go, and let's go back to the tests. So now I can mock IAuth service, and now it should work. Let's see what else breaks. Okay, yep. Okay, test is now passing. That's fantastic. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a base class with Couchbase mocks. Okay, make this an abstract class. Because what I want to do is I want to move all this Couchbase stuff, all this, right? No, except auth service. Move all this into here. We're going to make these protected. Let's just copy this whole thing for now, but I'm going to create a setup that instantiate those mocks, and there we have it. Okay, now here's another question, is that I have this setup in a base class, and I have a setup in my main class. So this is where I always get screwed up when it comes to inheritance in C#, is what do I do? Create an NUnit base class example that creates a protected member that's a mock, which gets instantiated in the setup, and create a class that inherits from that base class, which also has a setup. So it's making it virtual. So here's the actual concrete test, and it's doing an override and calling base. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. One thing you'll notice about unit tests is they are very fast, and that's one of the things about using mocks is I don't have to touch the database or any auth service. I just go right and run the test. So okay, so the next thing I want to test is, let's create a test. What if I don't pass in? Handle invalid credentials, returns unauthorized. Okay, so it's going to be kind of similar. I don't really need to set up a user in the database. I don't really need to submit anything particular in the login user model, although I'll put something in there because I might want to test the null or empty cases. But this doesn't matter, and password doesn't matter either. Not invalid credentials, but missing credentials. Let's go with that. So this is, I want to make a test for if the user doesn't even exist. And I'm trying to log in for the user doesn't exist. So I don't have to set up the fake get result mock because I'm not actually going to get to that point. And I'm not going to test the does password match. We're not going to get to that point. And we're not going to generate a JWT token either. So that's all I need to do is do that arrange. The user doesn't exist, and if the user doesn't exist, we don't need to continue any further. So then I'll do the act, which is right here. It's going to be the same exact act. And then assert. So I'm actually writing unit test myself, but I'm following the structure that ChatGPT created for me, which is a pretty good structure, pretty good name. It had to make some things up because I didn't give it the whole picture. I didn't give it class names and all the properties, but it did a pretty good job. Okay, so this failed. Why did this fail? So exists, this should return false, and then it should return new login result is unauthorized. Oh, I've got a bug in my code. And I just found it with a unit test. Is unauthorized equals true. So are you unauthorized? Yes, you're unauthorized. So look at that. Unit test helped me to find a bug. So without that, anyone could have logged in with any credentials. So that's a huge issue. There we go. So value of unit tests right there, huge. So we got unit tests. Let's go ahead and commit some unit tests. Do this, commit. Okay, so this is, if I go back to my GitHub view, this is a login endpoint that I'm testing. So this is going to be associated with number 1, added unit tests for login. Okay, and this is all the stuff I added to make that happen. Well, I also changed some structure of the project. So let's see, restructured project, add a unit test for login. Okay, so I added the new project here, of course. There's the test. That's all I really added was this test. Everything else is just kind of, I added these fakes as well. This is all just stuff being moved around in the project. So we got unit tests for our login request handler. I could create some unit tests for the other endpoints, or the other handler, I should say. I'm going to be testing this time the registration request handler. All right, and that's going to be a test fixture. And I can copy a little bit of this because I do want this to use the Couchbase mocks again with Couchbase mocks, and not login request handler, but registration request handler. It's a little bit of a long name. It's registration handler. Let's go with that. Okay, registration request handler, bucket provider and auth service, and I've got those, bucket provider and auth service. So I remember I mocked this earlier, It's in the base class now, I can reuse it. So really, what I need to test here is, it doesn't matter to me if you're registering what the username and password is, as long as it's specified. So I'm going to test for that. And if that user already exists, this is going to cause a problem. So I want to test for that too. So let's just first start the happy path. So I want valid registration and returns registration result. So the 3 steps of any unit test are arrange, act, and assert. I like to label them just to keep myself organized. Set up registration info submitted through the API. Okay, and if I remember, that has just username and password, right? So, registration submit model, which is model. Username, email, password. Okay, anyway, username doesn't matter. Password doesn't matter. And email doesn't matter at example.net. So the request goes in. Yep, so the act would be result equals handler.handle request cancellation token dot none. That's fine. I need auth service to give me a salt. So we'll set up a dot generate salt returns salt. I don't really care. Hash password needs to be set up as well. Hash password, and I don't really care. It dot is any string. It dot is any string returns hash password. Fine. Okay. Insert async needs to be set up. So that's on the collection. So collection mock dot setup. C dot insert async. The key is going to be email. Is that, and it is any user. Yep, that's fine. And options null, and then returns. I think, do I need to specify that? I don't need to, because the return is actually discarded. Because all I really care about is, did it work or not? And the main exception I care about is document exists. Generate JWT token, that needs to be set as well. So I think that's all I need. And assert. So we want to assert that result is not null. Sure, why not? Assert that result dot dot user view is not null. Result.userView.username. Username equals to submitted info.username. Also want to test, not password, but email. Submitted user email and bio. So bio is actually going to be equal to null. There's going to be nothing in there. When you register, you don't create a bio. And the same thing with image. You add that later. Okay, I think that's it. Let's, you know what? This should probably be a wait, right? Yeah, that's why that result showed up. Here I thought it was more nesting, but I just forgot to put my weight in there. I run this test, and there we go. Pass. Great. Now let's do some test-driven development, shall we? This is where I write tests before I write the actual implementation. Invalid registration form. Returns some sort of error. So this is a situation where a user is going to submit, let's say, a blank password. I'm not going to set up any sort of mocks for this because this should fail right away. Okay, and we're going to assert. Again, we can assert that result is not null. But now what do? I don't have anything. Assert that result dot, none of these fit, is invalid password. This might make it a little harder for the right test cases, but we'll get there. Bool is invalid password. Okay. All right. And so if I run this test, what's going to happen? It's going to fail because I don't have anything mocked out. I don't have that functionality written. Show me an example of using Fluent Validator with Mediator. So here's the validator, abstract validator of a certain object. Yep. So there's where I put all the rules. Fine, fine, fine. Create product command as mediator request object. Yep, that makes sense. If services, add controllers, add Fluent Validation. Well, I'm going to try something like this. I'm not quite sure about this whole validation result thing, but let's go with it. Let's add Fluent Validator to this project. So Fluent Validation is what it's called. Builder.services, add validators from assembly containing, which is not in here. What library is that in? And that appears to be another library, dependency injection extensions, which is used by 112 million downloads. So there we go, get the DI package. Okay, so there's that. And I don't have any validator yet, but I'm going to call this login request validator. So I have to inject this into my mediator handler. So like right here, this has to be injected. Yeah, iValidator, yep. Oh boy, okay. Well, that is a little annoying because now my unit tests are going to break. But that's okay. This is boilerplate that's going to be in every handler, probably every handler. Kind of annoying. Validation is kind of annoying in general. You just pass the correct thing, we don't have to worry about it. This would be abstract validator of registration request. And again, constructor. Okay, so I'm wanting to test the registration request handler. So this invalid password stuff, I'm ditching that. Instead, registration handler, this is where I need to put some validator as well. Validator of registration request, and add that. And then we can say, just the same code I had before, basically. See, this is where it gets kind of annoying because it's just copying and pasting. New registration result, validation errors. There we go. And so validation errors, we expect them to be there, so is not null. Validation errors, and in this case, password is missing. So I want there to be a count of one error. Okay, and the first one, dot error message, let's say, is equal to password must not be empty. Okay, expected not null, but was null because no validations ran. So I don't have any validations yet. Okay, so we got registration request coming in, and really, right now we're just testing passwords. So we're going to say rule for x dot model dot user dot password. Is it not empty? Yeah, not empty. Was it with message? Password must not be empty. So you kind of see the benefits here of Fluent validation is that I get this nice little, somewhat English-like, readable structure to my validations. So hey, that works. Okay, now I'm going to do some test cases. So test case is a way of basically creating a bunch of tests that all have the same code, but maybe have one, two, or three variables that are different each time. So in this case, I'm giving creating a parameter of password. And so my first test case is saying, okay, for my very first test, pass in empty string for password and use that. So this test is identical to the last one, so it should still pass. Now we can also get a little more prescriptive and say, okay, password is not a good password. We can say it's not long enough. Min length of 10, right? Password must be at least 10 characters long. Look at that. Nice little autocomplete for me. Okay, the problem here is that also this needs to correspond to a message. All right, and this must switch to message. And this might make more sense if this was error message. Okay, why didn't it like that? Password must not be empty. Expected 1, but was 2. Oh, because now I added this requirement here, and that's also going to fail that test. So I should say is greater than or equal to 1, and any error message equals error message, and set that to is true. So this is a little more awkward. So now this test should pass. So that wasn't actually an error in my test. You gotta watch out for sometimes. Okay, that's passing. Okay, let's see what this Cascade Mode stuff. This is kind of interesting. The default behavior, it's going to continue to execute subsequent rules. Oh, okay. Cascade Mode, stop. Then I can go back to my tests and switch this to is equal to 1. First, dot error message is dot equal to message. Makes it a little easier to read the test if I put it in Cascade Mode. Okay, pass. So all the validation logic is encapsulated here. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day, everyone, and we'll see you then.